Welcome to Inside Independent Publishing with IBPA. I'm your host, Christopher Locke. I'm also the IBPA Director of Membership and Member Services. In a saturated book market where the big five publishers carry a lot of weight, independent publishers have come up with some clever tactics to garner attention for their books. One such publisher is Muse Incorporated. Founder and CEO Leah Hernandez joins the podcast today and shares details about how she's created strategic partnerships to grow book sales, how she's gotten her books into the education market, and helpful ways she's raised funds for her publishing endeavors. Welcome, Leah.
Thanks so much for having me, Christopher. I'm excited to be here with you today.
Yeah. Well, first off, I want to thank you. You ran a workshop at our IBPA Publishing University, so I hope that was a good experience for you.
Yes, it was amazing. Brandy and I over at Mahogany Pen Press ran an amazing session for Black and Brown publishers. And it was a really great space to be able to connect with other publishers, share some of the same challenges, but then most importantly, talk about ways and strategies for us to all scale our companies.
And you all are now billionaires from what I've heard. So very successful. Good job.
So successful.
Okay, so there's a lot to cover today, but I want to start with the background on your publishing businesses. Okay, so you started with Young Authors Publishing, and then you transitioned to making that an imprint under Muse Incorporated. So first, I just wanted to see, well, what inspired you to start Young Authors Publishing?
Yeah, well, so we have to go back a few years. I got into publishing because I wrote and self-published my own book. And because I was, one of few people in my community and in my network who have done something like that, I got a lot of feedback and wanting people to help me do the same. So I consulted for a few months, published a few books, and then at the time I was still studying at Clark Atlanta University, and the Atlanta Housing Authority was looking for a new youth development program. And I was only a junior in college, so I'm like, I can't really do nothing that well, but I figured out how to put a book together, and that has to count for something. So maybe I can help these kids write and publish a book. And I did that. And that was honestly the start of the company. We published our first title was called Roxy's Day in Vine City, which is a real community here in Atlanta at the time. It was being rapidly gentrified because we had a new stadium that was going up. So four dynamic, beautiful girls wrote a story about a Chihuahua who is new to the community and took a walk around the town and noticed all these new things and then learned the history about this town. And the community really backed it. Schools loved it. Libraries supported it. And so the next year we did 13 books by 13 young men. And we've kind of just been growing ever since.
Wow. So I know that you have now created a bigger company, Muse Incorporated. So how did you go from that publishing company to saying, okay, well, I want to have a bigger company and then it'll be an imprint under that?
Yeah, well, I knew that I never wanted the mission of Young Authors Publishing to change. I didn't want to adjust it. I didn't want to jade it or messy it up with anything else. But I also wanted to work with adult authors, and I wanted to work with, really cool books that were maybe a little inappropriate and didn't fit under the Young Authors Publishing brand, because Young Authors Publishing only publishes books written by young people for young people. And so I knew that I needed a new imprint, if you will. But as I was thinking about what that imprint could be, and then, more broadly, what I wanted publishing to look like as far as having more experiences for people in color who work in this industry and having different services, I knew that it was bigger than just an imprint. And so that's where Muse was introduced. Of course, we have Muse, which is our adult fiction and nonfiction imprint that does books, but then we also are getting ready to host conferences and podcasts and more spaces that are curated for people of color who work in this industry, and creating more spaces for us to be seen, be heard, and most importantly, learn from each other. So that way we can all accomplish our career goals, whether you're working for a big five or you're trying to run and grow your own independent publishing company.
Wow. So Media Mogul is going to be their new title.
I'm a woman of many hats. So in this season of my life, this is the new crazy idea. So we'll see where it takes me.
And so people know, how many books do you publish under each imprint per year at this point?
That's a great question. Right now for our adult imprint, with Muse, we're about 6 to 7 books a year. Young Authors Publishing has went down, but honestly, it's anywhere from like 3 books to 10 books, depending on the year and depending on the season. I'm sure other independent publishers out there can attest. One year you may do 13, another year you may do 2. It kind of just depends on the seasonality of your company.
Of course, yeah. All right, so I want to talk about these strategic partnerships that have helped you, and that way other publishers can start thinking for their own publishing companies, well, what can we do? So one thing that you do is you license your books to literary agencies, and I wanted to just help them understand, well, first off, like how do you approach these agencies to get them interested in doing that with your books?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think before we talk about how to approach them, I think publishers should have a pretty solid understanding of where we are within the literacy space, especially as a country. We're going through a literacy crisis. Our kids are not reading, they are not reading at grade level, and the children that are most impacted are children of color. And so there are tons of literacy organizations and apps and initiatives that are really trying to help with this curve and honestly with the deficit of kids not reading at grade level. And so the ways that I've approached them, there are two organizations that I like to look at. There are your literacy organizations and nonprofits that their mission is to get physical books in the hands of kids, right? And that's where you can like sell some of your paperback, your hardcover, like the physical copies to them that they will then distribute to children who need them most. The second are there's a rise of not only just literacy in English, but I think educational apps that are teaching kids how to read and how to do math. But more specifically for reading, they're looking and need content. And so we have the content, most importantly, we have the diverse content that they're looking for to help kids read. And so what that looks like is I will typically send out an email, I'll send our catalog. If we have any reviews, what I will say is that reviews really haven't helped me too much in like this space because this is more of like, I would consider it a specialty sale, right? Like you're not selling to a Barnes and Noble or to a library who may have some of the same trade requirements as, you know, as most do. What they are really looking for is for the content. And so things that have helped us is like having all of our books leveled. So that way I can tell them this is for second graders, this is for readers who are reading on a first grade level. Those have been really important. And then from there, it's just a matter of conversation, what type of content they're looking for, what's in our catalog that we have that we can send. We send samples, and then once they let us know which books they like, then we license them. And literally all that looks like is sending an electronic copy of the book, which is really helpful for publishers because we're not having to, there's no cost for that sale, right? You're not having to do another print run. You're not having to even spend money really in marketing. You're just selling the ebook version license to that educational app. And you can be creative how many years you want it on the app. If there are any royalties or sales that people like can download, we make sure that that's not the case, but they've been really helpful to make sure that the creator and the publisher, it's a win-win for us.
Yeah, so I see. So then there's these apps that do you have like a, because I know with libraries, there's like a certain amount or something of downloads, or like you were saying, a certain amount of years. Is that something that's decided in advance, like with some contract?
Yeah, and it is. And every app is different. So there are some apps that have like a subscription base. So if there's a subscription base, we may come in on the royalty on the back end. But if that's not the case, or if that's not an option, then we charge more upfront because they're making money off of that content. And you want to make sure that you and your author are, you know, getting a part of that. But in our case scenario, a lot of times this app, you can't download the book. So people can't just have free copies of your book, which is important, right? And they're not charging per book. So one app that comes to mind is an app called World Reader. They're a global organization. One of the, I believe their founder of this nonprofit was like one of the early employees at, I know this is a nasty word here, but Amazon, but he had a real heart for caring about literacy and making sure that kids had books. And so their platform is really cool because we get to see data of how many kids in India and China and different parts of Africa are reading our book. And then that data really helps inform our decision from a content perspective in regards to how we're producing books and what's the content and what's the theme, because they have that technology and we then have access to how long they're reading our books, how many times they read the book over, what books are bestsellers, and then also too, what books are working well in particular markets. So when we have conversations about foreign rights translations, you know, I have that data. I know what works well in the market in India. I know what works well in the UK market and in South Africa. And that makes my job a lot easier to approach different publishers to try to buy foreign rights translations.
And it's okay to use explicit language like Amazon. We'll just bleep it out, so don't worry.
That's what we'll do.
Yeah. So this is mostly then your children's books, or is it also the Muse adult books too?
Yeah, it's a good question. Transparently speaking, it's been mostly children's books, but that
Mm.
doesn't say, I wouldn't say that that's just the rule of thumb. There could
Mhm.
be organizations and platforms out there that could be interested in adult titles, especially now because I think, again, going back to the literacy space, people are recognizing that children develop a love of reading in the home. And so a part of our goal and initiative to get kids reading again is to get their parents reading again, right? And so that
Mhm.
could be a way that you get your adult books in that marketing in that category where now it's family time. The parent is reading their book, the child is reading their book, and it's something that's communal and that the entire family can do together.
And then you were mentioning about then the international sales. So do like like, in terms of your translations, do all your books have multiple translations, or how does it work? Like if they want a Spanish language version of one of your books or something.
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's two separate things here,
Uh,
right?
uh,
So sometimes the platform will say, "Hey, do you have this book available in Spanish?" And
uh.
then maybe we don't, but we make that version so that way they can pay the licensing fee for that, right? But what I'm more so speaking to is, especially if you're working with an app that has the technology to give you really good data, you can then use that data to then sell your foreign rights licenses to
Oh,
different publishers. It's something that we haven't had too much success in because it hasn't been a focus. And so it's something that we're doing right now. But what I will say is a lot of the pitches that I'm crafting, I'm using data from these partners and I'm able to tell, for example, let's say a publisher in South Africa, how many readers are reading our books in South Africa, how many minutes they're spending reading our books, and then maybe some of the reviews or things like that they leave on the app. I hope that answered your question and
yeah.
offered some more clarity.
Yeah. Because I know it is a different subject. I know that there are a lot of publishers questioning because they want to make their books available to different markets and they want to, everyone to be able to read the books. But as you know, it's so costly to create even, any version of the book
Oh,
that they
yeah.
need to make sure there's a market for this before they just start, all the costs of creating some other, language version of their book. So that's so cool that you get that type of data that then propels you to make that,
Yeah.
like a smart decision rather than just being like, this might do well,
Yeah, but
for a
I'm gonna
Japanese
spend all
version.
this money to do
Hmm.
it and we'll see how it goes. And in fact, we had a platform pay for the translation. They already had a translator on their staff and we gave them a discount on our licensing fee because in return they gave us the Spanish version of our book that I didn't have to pay for that I can
Oh.
now then sell. And so, depending on if you find the right partner, there are ways that it can definitely be mutually beneficial because as independent publishers, we don't have those big budgets, y'all. We can't just, keep dishing out a whole lot of money on the potential of making profit on the back end. We need to know that before we make that investment.
And like you said, I love that you base it on data, and that's just once you have that knowledge, you can make like smart financial decisions versus kind of just guessing. I want to see if do you have any? Do you want to list any organizations that you like working with, or that are good companies that you find to like other publishers might want to work with too?
Yeah, and what I will say is this is more geared towards children's books because that's where
Yeah.
we have the most success, and that's also what majority of our catalog is. World Reader is definitely a great partner. Barbershop Books is a really great organization. They started out as a nonprofit, but now they have an e-library and they've licensed a few of our books. iReadify is another one. They have an audio component to it, so children can listen to the book and then see the words, and then they are really cool about changing the images so they kind of move. So that's really cool for our readers. Let's see, there are a few more. Book Nook is another one. They're based in the Bay. We've honestly, that's been our longest standing relationship. So shout out to Book Nook. We've been doing business with them for I think like 4.5 years. They were the first ever platform that approached us
Mhm.
for this and really opened up the possibility of licensing books to literacy platforms.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to move on to another partnership that we talked about with schools. and you mentioned that you had a writing mentorship program at one point. So I wanted to talk to you about how you set that up, and then the when you went into doing this, like what was your vision with this mentorship program?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that's taken me back a little because that's when we first started.
Mm.
And I knew that I wanted to work with kids, but I had to go to where these kids were. And so I would go to schools and I would go to after school programs and I would work one-on-one with the kids. There was a time where I was working with like 18 young boys, which going through the puberty and middle school there, it was a lot. And I was like, at that moment, I knew I needed writing mentors and I needed help because I could not 10 to 18 boys with 18 different stories and ideas and making sure that we crafted a really beautiful book. And so what I did is I reached out to college students who were either getting their degree in education and who wanted to be in the classroom or who wanted to work in publishing. And the way that I set up the writing mentor program is I already had a curriculum that I created that like walked students through how to create their book. And so they used that to follow that path. But what I would do is I think we had like maybe for every 2 to 3 students, we had one mentor. We also, the last program we did was in the pandemic, so we had to do that virtually, but it ended up working better because students were able to work one-on-one with a mentor. And so they would write their book, they would go through their outline, character development, first draft, second draft. Once the book was done, that writing mentor then would work and communicate directly with our illustrators and with the editor. So they would go back and forth with illustrators, they would approve designs, they would get feedback from the author. And then once all of the books were illustrated and done, then they learned metadata. So they learned how to create a book synopsis, how to do BISAC codes, how to come up with keywords. And again, we had all of this. It was like a template. So it was really easy for them to follow. And I used a lot of tools and softwares that kind of helped. And I'm happy to share those resources later. But it was a really great program because not only did students get to work one-on-one with a writing mentor to help them write this book, but college students were given real access to the publishing industry, and they were learning these critical things that most publishers or agencies, depending on what type of job you want in this industry, need to know. But a lot of times, it's the barriers to entry are so hard. And so what we were finding is that a lot of our interns were then getting jobs at publishers because they had went through this program and they got this experience. So it was a really beautiful full circle moment. What I will say is that it became hard to manage and scale. And we kind of had to make a decision on if we wanted to be a really good program or a really good publisher. And one of the things that was a strong mission for me when I started was providing access to capital for our authors. So we needed to sell books. We needed to sell books so these babies could get paid. And in order for that to happen, I had to figure out and crack the code to how to be a really good publisher. And so we stopped that program and kind of went into submissions. But for anybody out there who is looking to do something similar, I think that it is a phenomenal program and it is so impactful and transformative for students, both the mentors and the writers.
Well, now you have curriculums that you have. So can you, because it's like a different method, but it's a great way for you to get your books into this market. So can you tell us like about these curriculums that you have?
Yeah, so that same process that I just explained, we put that in a curriculum. We got a group of educators and teachers. So it has all of the standards, the ELA standards, the Common Core standards. We're based in Atlanta, so we have Georgia Performance Standards, and we license that curriculum to schools. So that way students are creating these books in the classroom as a part of their regular instruction. It's not meant to replace the current writing curriculum, but it was designed to complement it and to be a more creative outlet for students. And so we found success in schools hosting their own writing competitions, and then they have winners from each class, and then they can submit those books to us for the chance of publishing. But it's been a great pivot because more students can write books, and we're able, now we've created a new product and a new title, if you will, from now with my publisher hat on, is royalty free, which is really great for P&Ls.
And I wanted to see, because, one of the hardest things for publishers is it feels like it's like impenetrable, like the education market where they're like, they have books that they think would be great for schools, but they're like, well, how do I connect with them? And you seem to have had really great success. So how was that process of Like, did you just email them, or like, how did you connect to these administrators, teachers? Like, what was that process?
What I will say is I'm still trying to crack the code to this. So I wouldn't coin myself as an expert just yet because I believe, are so many more districts and states that we can be in and that we're not. But where I have found success is working with schools who I've already had relationships with. So when I was going into the classrooms and doing this for free and was just like, I just created this program, I can help kids write books, they were like, great, come on in. And those relationships then connected me to other districts in the state that I'm in. And, doing more work with community as far as providing books, doing literacy events for the community. I meet people who are teachers, who are principals, and you get the buy-in from those people. It's a lot easier to then get the buy-in on a district level. And to me, I found more success kind of going through some of these unorthodox ways of going in versus just trying to email the superintendent and like sending them your catalog, right? It's relationship. And I think that that's all publishing is too, is where your relationships and who is in your network. But I think also too, figuring out what is the value added for them, because they get bombarded, especially now with technology. There's a new app for everything. People are trying to get schools to buy all kinds of things. But what need is your book, your curriculum, or your product solving? And I think that's something that could be really helpful.
Awesome. So I wanted to pivot to another topic. You have traditional distribution, right? Where like, and that's something that can be very difficult for indie publishers to come by. So traditional distribution, just for anybody listening, is different from like wholesale, where like it's on Ingram Spark or something and people can just order it. Like with traditional distribution, you have a sales team that will sell your books to the trade market, bookstores, retail stores, and such. But you have to get a traditional distributor to buy in, to want to do that. So I'm interested, how did you land that? That's something a lot of people want, and it's hard to come by.
It's extremely hard to come by. And I wish that I had an answer that I think is like an easy fit for all publishers. But I think even for me, we came in a very unorthodox way. So I tell people that I've been publishing since 2017, but I didn't get exposed to the industry till 2020 because that was the first time I attended a conference of publishers. I went to PubWest. I was their scholarship recipient, so I got to go for free because I couldn't afford to go by myself. But that's where I learned about distribution, right? Because I was selling books out my dorm and out of my car and like doing everything the gritty way. And so when I went to PubWest, I met all these distributors. And so I've had conversations with all of them and they all told me the same thing. We didn't have enough sales. We didn't have enough books and enough track record. But it was like, but in order to get the sales and the track record, I need distribution, right? And so it's kind of like a catch-22. And with Ingram specifically, I had so many conversations with different people who worked at Ingram. And so finally, one guy was like, you know what? Just talk to Jen over at West Margin Press. And at the time, West Margin Press was a publisher that was owned by Ingram Content Group. And so I had met Jen at the PubWest conference and she knew about our books, she knew about our mission. And she was like, I really love what you're doing. I'm happy to allow you to just distribute your books under us. But we would have the same access as every publisher because we're under the Ingram brand. So a year after that, they were acquired and then we moved to IPS and then now we're at Consortium. And we're a standalone publisher, but that was not how we got in at all. And so, in fact, one of the things that we do now is we distribute BIPOC publishers under our contract with Ingram as a way to kind of provide that same space. So we have an art magazine based in Paris, France called Pop Out Zine. Then we also have another distributor here, or another publisher, excuse me, here in the States that does a line of children's books that we're distributing as well.
Well, there's two things there that I love. One is, you're really good at the networking. I think that's something that people should really learn is you have to just start going to things, talking to people, meeting people, making connections. And like you said, of course, it can be quite costly to go to various conferences, but you were able to get a scholarship. And also, if you can maybe just go to one, just try to find a way to go, because you're gonna and talk to people. Don't just go and sit and whatever, have like coffee or something. But like you really got to get out there because these relationships are clearly very beneficial to you. And the other thing I like is that you're giving back, that, now that you've had some success, that you're helping others. So hopefully there's other publishers out there that, have also had great success, and they can start thinking, oh, maybe I should, start, all the ways I knew that it was challenging for me, I can help other publishers.
Yeah, I think the biggest like mental shift that's been so helpful for me is really understanding that nobody is going to come save us. And
Mm,
like, and I know that that may sound really harsh for the listeners out there, but if you're an independent publisher, especially if you're a BIPOC independent publisher or you come from a marginalized community, no one is coming to save us
mm,
except us. And so I think as an independent publishing community, we
mm.
have to find better ways to work together and reach across to help us obtain some of these goals, because we keep trying to climb up this ladder and it's so massive and it's so huge, and we're going to fail every time. And so I hope for anybody listening out there, I just encourage you all to look at the things that you do really well. And believe me, there's something that you excel in and only you can do at that level. And then reach out to the person that's doing something that's cool next to you and see how you can maybe exchange resources and exchange skill sets to uplift one another. And even for my publishers, that's what they've done for me. Like now we can consider ourselves an international publisher because we are distributing a publisher based in Paris, France. And she opened up a world of network that I didn't have access to before. So while I'm helping her get in the door, she's really helping me in so many different ways. And so it's a win-win for both.
Yeah, and I love that idea. Rather than seeing other publishers as competitors, that you see them as people that you all can learn from each other and help each other. So I hope there's more and more of that. So let's talk about funding. That's also something that's very difficult for indie publishers, and you have had some success. So I know that you got investment from the Pharrell Williams Black Ambition Fund, and then you were part of the Tory Burch Fellowship. So how did those come to be? Did you scour the internet and go, I need to apply, or how did you, even see that those were opportunities?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that, well, one, I attended Clark Atlanta University and I went to their School of Business. And so my network prior to coming into publishing was very business focused. And so I had access to a lot of fellowships, a lot of grants, a lot of pitch competitions. And that's the mindset that I came into when I started this business, was like not necessarily how to do publishing the right way, but like what are people who are just starting businesses doing to grow and scale their businesses? And they're attending these fellowships, they're going to pitch competitions, they're getting investments from organizations who are supporting marginalized communities. And so that's how I got access to those. I think with that mindset is important. Specifically with Pharrell Williams Black Ambition Fund, we were a part of his inaugural cohort. So they specifically give to Black and Latinx founders. And then they have two categories. So they have a category for like just regular Black and Latinx folks who started businesses, and then specifically people who graduated and went to HBCUs. And so I think at the time that I had applied, I had just graduated from college. And so somebody within my university, I think a friend, like sent it to me. And then it was all over news because this is Pharrell Williams. Like I grew up listening to Pharrell Williams and I had no clue that he had started this. And so it was something that I really wanted to apply for, but I just didn't know. I didn't know if we were ready for that. Like I didn't know if maybe we weren't making enough. Like there were just all of these things that I told myself in my head that we weren't ready for. But regardless, I still sent it my application. We got accepted. We got funding from them. And it's been a really amazing community. And I think a lot of times I initially was really hesitant to apply for a lot of these things because I recognized that publishing, we're like on our own siloed island. Like people don't really know how this industry works. They think it's a dying industry. They think that there's no money in it. They think that Amazon has taken over everything. And while some of these things may be true, I'm still looking at the numbers and I'm looking at the data, and I see that this is, I think, what a $310 billion industry globally, and the US alone is bringing in 25 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So there's money here. We just have to think creatively about how we get into it. And I think that the fellowships, the funders that I've had I think that they were really attractive to our business because they recognize that there's not too many players in this space who are then kind of crossing over into just like business and fellowships and grants and pitch competitions. That was a long-winded way of saying that, but I hope that answered your question.
No, absolutely. And I'm interested, are you still consistently looking for these type of opportunities for your business?
1,000%. I don't think I think until hopefully with the help of our associations can come up with more advocacy work around publishing and for publishers to get money on a federal level, I think as an independent publisher, even if you're a hybrid publisher, you have to look at creative ways to get money. And so grants, pitch competitions, fellowships, I think will always be the core. I have slowed down because there was a season where I was like spending more time applying to grants and I was trying to make sales. And I'm like, okay, Leah, well, if you can just shift gears, we can sell more books and then that'll bring the money in. And so that's kind of how I adjusted things. But now what I'm looking for is connection to networks. So aside from money, if there is a network that I believe could really help and further us, whether it's brand visibility or marketing or sales, then I'm going to apply to attend that community and be a part because I can learn so much. For example, the Tory Burch Fellowship, I have made so many incredible relationships with women business owners, and we have like our small huddles. So I'm in a huddle with women who have their own toy businesses, and even the way that they, do business with Walmart and Target, like they're introducing me to buyers and are, giving me information that can help my business. So I think money aside, the community has honestly brought more money in than whatever money that fellowship itself has given me. And so for that, I think that independent publishers should definitely look more into those.
Yeah. And are there some resources you might share that, have been helpful to you, like that has like a list of like whatever grants or fellowships or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons, especially depending on the state that you're in. So I would look up small business grants and resources for whatever state you're in and just do a quick Google search because a lot of times there are communities in your specific city that are dedicated to supporting small business owners. And I can't speak to each state, but for the ones that I've been a part of, I'm happy to share those. And I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Some of these are across the country too. So like Tory Burch, you can be anywhere in the US and apply. Black Ambition, you can be anywhere in the world or the country to apply. In Atlanta specifically, there's organizations called Goody Nation. I've also done Camelback Ventures based in New Orleans. So there are tons out there. I think just a simple Google search of like pitch competitions for small business owners, grants for small business owners. And then if you come from a marginalized community too, there are organizations specifically dedicated to helping us.
Awesome. So one thing I wanted to close on is we talked about this previously, the idea of a company having a brand. There's a lot of industries like, let's say like Pixar is a brand. And when you hear it's a new Pixar movie, you're like, let me go see that. But indie publishers and even the big five don't necessarily focus on the brand. They're like book to book. But you were telling me that you feel like it's important for indie publishers to build their brand. Can you talk about why you think it's important and then maybe ways that, you've built your brand versus like just thinking of, I'm going to market this book and then that book?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the core of it and why indie publishers need to build their own brand is because I think the sustainable way for us to for us to exist as independent publishers is to sell D2C, sell direct to consumer and own our audience, know our audience, have their emails, have their contact information, do surveys, find out what they like and what they don't like. And the God's honest truth is if you're just selling to Amazon, you have no access, no control, and no awareness of who is buying your book on the other side. And I think that is such a disadvantage for independent publishers because honestly, it's like we're working siloed. We're just like, excuse my language, we're just like making shit on our own and being like, I hope this lands well. Like, I hope they like it. But you don't know if we're only doing business B2B every single time. And so I think that the way to have more of a direct to consumer base is to build your own brand. And I think the benefit of building a publishing brand is people will then know what to come to you for. Like if people are looking for books, diverse books that are written by kids, people are automatically going to think of young authors publishing. And that's helpful because that's how we get recurring customers, right? And so that's what I will say to that. I'm forgetting the second part of your question. I don't know if I answered it or not.
No, that was it. I mean, basically,
Okay.
it's just why it's important to have a brand, and then also maybe how you
Oh,
specifically built your brand, that other publishers can learn from, where they go, not necessarily exactly, but just what are some ways, and like you just mentioned, I mean, you have such a specific mission that it's helpful because it's so focused versus it being like, we publish whatever, young adult books or something, and you're like,
yeah.
okay. So I think that it's built into that, your publishing business, your brand. So that really helps.
Yeah, it's a great question. Your niche, figuring out what your niche is. I think for young authors, publishing was really easy because it was books by kids for kids. And so like that tagline was super helpful. We also had another tagline that was all kids are story worthy. And so finding a tagline that's helpful for you. I think more on like a practical sense, having a brand guide is important. Like we have to have cohesive and consistent branding
Mm.
throughout. And I think that may be tough for publishers because we're so used to selling one-off books and we want all that branding to only be in connection to that book. But I think the more that we can find a link between all of the books that we publish and kind of like support them more as like a catalog of like, hey, if you're looking for X book, like you come here. But I think more intentionally and maybe more broadly, what that looks like is actually going out and being in the community. And
Mm.
so, for example, like we still do in-person events. Um, 2 years ago, we did the Atlanta Jazz Festival, which was like one of our biggest in-person events to date. I think we did like close to 10,000 in 3 days, because it's a jazz festival. And
Mm.
so a lot of the vendors out there are like lotions and perfumes
Mm.
and like, and that's great. And then food vendors, but it was like we were the only book people there. And if, here in Atlanta, the Atlanta Jazz Festival, that's where the aunties are going, that's where the grandmas are going, and they love the babies, right? Everybody has, a niece, a nephew, a grandson, a kid. And that's why I think for children's book publishers specifically, that's a really great market. Um, so that's what I would say is like that's how we've really built our core audience because they see, first of all, they're looking at the covers of our books and they see that they're diverse and that makes them feel seen and that makes them get excited. But then they find out that we're Black owned and that, and then that our team is also diverse. And then
Mm.
we're like in communication and conversation with them. So I know that it's a lot of work and I'm not taking away from that. I was exhausted. In fact, I was also 4 months pregnant when I did that. And so I was like wiped by the end of that third day,
Yeah,
but it really helped us build relationships with our core audience. So
of
consistent
course.
branding, cohesive branding, and then anytime you can get out and meet whoever your target audience is, figure out where they shop, figure out where they go, and show up in those spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love that moment because I've been at certain events and I've been like with my books and I've been like, oh, this is perfect. Like it just everything clicks and you're like, oh, right, we're in. But yeah,
Yeah.
the in-person events are absolutely like just it takes everything you have. And by the end of the day, you're just like, you can't even think straight. But I'm
Oh,
so
yeah.
glad that was successful for you. Well, this is some excellent information. I really think people listening are going to learn a lot. I'm glad we got you before the media mogul thing kicked in. You wouldn't even talk to us. So
I
thank you.
would, I would. Oh, well, I'm happy to be here. This has been so helpful, and the conference that you all put on was really amazing. So thank you again for just creating this space for independent publishers. Thank you so much for this podcast. When I say I'm a fan of the podcast, like I listen to it when I drive. Like my family's sick of it at this point, and so I'm super honored to be on it. And I really hope that this conversation resonates well with independent publishers and hopefully gives you all a little bit more motivation and encouragement to keep doing the good work.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's anytime someone shares their story and then the various things, I appreciate you for being candid. It's so helpful for other indie publishers to just kind of get their creative juices flowing and going. I haven't thought of that before. I can't believe I didn't. Let me give that a go. Well, I want everyone to check out Muse Incorporated. It's Muse, so museinc.net. And you all have three books that are either out or coming out. Kinfolk Meditations,
Yes,
Not to Anything, and Tempted to Taste It.
yes.
So that's awesome. Congrats. I hope people will check those out. And for more information about all the benefits of being an IBPA member, I hope you visit ibpa-online.org. And make sure to subscribe to this podcast. We drop a new episode on YouTube, everywhere you get your podcasts, the last Thursday of every month. I'm so grateful to chat with you again. Thank you for sharing your experience, and also congrats. I mean, it's just exciting to see how, like you were saying, you were in college when you started this. I mean, what an amazing journey. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.